Good day, everyone. So, for today's discussion, we're going to talk about modern fantasy. We are the Group 5 reporters, Miss Ira Nadine Francena, me, Vanessa Orense, and Miss Marjorie Nicole Fonergar. So, at the end of this lesson, student will be able to first understand what modern fantasy is, second, identify the different types of modern fantasy, third, knowing the evaluation and selection of modern fantasy, fourth, answer the short assessment about this lesson. Modern fantasy. It refers to the body of literature in which the event, the settings, or the characters are outside the realm of possibility. A fantasy is a story that cannot happen in real life or real world. And for this reason, this genre has been called the literature of the fanciful impossible. So it is a literature written by a known author that is set either in a make-believe or imaginary world in which places, people, and creatures could not exist or happen events that could not possibly happen, such as a tiny people taking animals and traveling through times. So modern fantasy literature is a genre where they are elements that are not possible in real life, such as mythic or paranormal plot, characters, and themes. And there are two types of modern fantasy. The first one is high fantasy, which occur in another world where physical and human laws do not exist. So it's begin in real world, but the characters are soon transported into another. So it is a magical world where the most of the story occurs. And the second one is a low fantasy, which though set in the real world, presents events which are magical. So its entire story takes place in the world as we know it, but at least one element or reality is altered. Aim of modern fantasy. One of the most obvious benefit of fantasy is that allows reader to experiment with different ways of seeing the world. It takes a hypothetical situation and invites reader to make connections between this fictive scenario and their own social reality. Readers of modern fantasy are becoming actively engaged with the story and message being presented. Engage with fantasy can stimulate creativity and boost vocabulary. It may help children develop better self-regulation skills. It might even enhance their working memory performance. So modern fantasy help us to enhance our communication and thinking by increasing our frame of references and understanding, creating interest, and going beyond the intellect to act on our emotions.
So, for evaluation and selection, the usual standards for fine fiction must also be met by authors of modern fantasy. So, just like how other written works are made, for it to be justified, the author must follow certain standards and criteria for it to be accepted to its placement. So, in addition, the following criteria apply specifically for or to modern fantasy. So, the authors of modern fantasy have the challenge of persuading readers to open themselves up to believing that which is contrary to reality, strange, whimsical, or magical, yet has an internal logic and consistency. So, why does the author needs to persuade his or her readers? It will simply fall into explanation that fantasy or fantasies is something that has no solid grounds. That is why it is considered as something unbelievable and superstitious because it is hard to defend its existence, yet it is existing. Sometimes, authors will accomplish this through beginning the story into a familiar and ordinary setting with typical contemporary human beings as characters. So, it is also a contradiction of reality and are called whimsical which means unusual and strange in a way that may be funny or annoying. While it is very important to our literature because this is how we manage to caught up the attention of the children or the learners and teach them lessons in life without being harsh to their innocence. And a transition is then made from this realistic world to the fantasy world. So, well, I know you already notices this. Many of the fantasy stories that are emerging starts with a simple typical life of a human characters and then will transform into the magical scenes afterwards to create excitement. Next one, for a modern fantasy to be truly imaginative, the author must provide a unique setting. In some stories, the setting may move beyond the realistic in both time. So, it's moving to the past or future or holding time still. From the famous fantasy stories and movies, they uses time as their paid actors to portray the climax of the story. All of us, even if we didn't honestly test this, we are amazed when a movie stops the time or the characters will be traveling from the real time to their past or future life. And then place imagined worlds. So for the place, most of the animated stories and movies creates their own worlds that feeds their superstitious minds. So for example, prince and princesses on the movie Barbie will never be them if there are no castles. However, Harry Potter will never be Harry Potter if he didn't ride a train station that is hiding on a wall from the real world train station and go to Hogwarts. In other stories, only of these elements, place or time will go beyond reality. Or in other stories, either place or time will be imaginative for them to complete the story. Moreover, a modern fantasy author's creation must be original. So, all authors sets the mind of the people of their original piece. They create, name, and imprint something on someone's imagination, and that is their power. So, no one should ever look like the other because being unique in creating fantasy is really vital. If it looks like someone, it is his or her identity and not yours. Next one. In recent years, partially due to an upsurge of sects whose members refer to themselves as witches, challenges to fantasies for children have increased. In selecting and recommending stories with these elements, teachers needs to be aware of the concern of the students' parents with regard to the supernatural as a topic in books for children. So why? Because witches have a positive and negative impact to children's. They may think that witches are something that is terrifying and scary, and when they bump into a old woman with a witchy looks, just like how their teachers describe them to them, they may harm the old woman or they may harm themselves from running away from the old woman. Otherwise, teachers must be fully aware of the consequences and create a healthy and safe learning environment from being fully aware and ready to disseminate the proper education and learnings that the students need. Next, the other types of modern fantasy. So, in modern fantasy, as in other genres, Distinctions between kind are not totally discrete. So just like the others, they may have clusters to differentiate and makes them unique. Still, they are family and carry similarity all along. Now, for the types of modern fantasy, number 1, modern folktales. Modern folktales or literary folktales are, as they are also called, are tales told in a form similar to that of a traditional tale with accompanying typical elements like little character description, strong conflict, fast-moving plot with a sudden resolution, vague setting, and in some cases, magical elements. But these modern tales have a known identifiable author who has written the tale in this form. So, modern folk tales are famous around the world. Its examples are Rapunzel, Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and etc. They became modern even though they are a traditional tale because it is being revived and are used for different stories now for the story to be timely and yet preserved. So when we talk about traditional tale, it is referred by a story that is passed by generation by the elders. So as we all know, Cinderella, Rapunzel, and etc. is emerging as traditional tale from our past down to the present. And in the present, we all know that these traditional tales has their own revive pieces on the media. Cinderella has different point of views and uh, parts, and it is relatively timely. Yet, the traditional tale as it is preserved. Then, number 2, animal fantasies. Animal fantasies are stories in which animals behave as human beings in that they experience emotions, they can talk, they have the ability to reason. Usually, the animals in fantasies will and should retain many of their animal characteristics. The author will interpret the animal for the reader in human terms without destroying the animal's integrity or removing it from membership in the animal world. So, animal fantasies also became famous nowadays. Authors uses animals and let it portrays the usual problems that they encounter and let people knows their life without being without even justifying if it is true or not. Yet, animal fantasies gives us the point of view of the animals, gives them life as a human, and even emotions to be interpreted and to be understood. Next one, we have personified toys and objects. Stories in which admired objects or beloved toys are brought to life and believed in by a child or adult character in the story are the focus of this type of fantasy. In these stories, the object, toy, or doll becomes real to the human protagonist and in turn becomes real to the child reader. So, as we look on the left side of our screen, as you can see, the example given is the Toy Story, which is really the exact personified toys and objects, because the characters of the Toy Story is toys, and they are all objects, and they can talk, they can walk, they can move just like us humans. And just like animal fantasies, personified toys and objects gives human-like life adaptation to toys and objects for people to know how would they feel. And somehow, as for me, for example, this teaches me to be more organized and clean to my things, because honestly, it gives me the feeling that they can feel it, and they can be saddened by it, of course. And it is justified that um the object, the toy or doll becomes real to the human protagonist, and in turn to us, the reader or the child reader, it becomes real, and it was real becomes real. And that's it.
Thank you. Now let's go on to unusual characters and strange situations. Some authors approach fantasy through reality, but take it beyond reality to the ridiculous or exaggerated. Generally, those stories can be best described as having unusual characters or strange situations. Without a doubt, Alice Alice Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll is the best known of this type of modern fantasy. So, this type of modern fantasy, it tackles or talk about strange things happening in the story, but unlikely to happen in real life. Like the given example, Alice in Wonderland or Alice Adventure in Wonderland. It is unlikely that a bunny can talk in human language and even has a pocket watch and keeps checking on it and rushing because the bunny needs to go in a certain place or location, and it is also unlikely for a human to go through a small hole in a tree and then fall and see that he or she is upside down, and the things that are there are bigger than her or him. So that is very impossible to happen in real life. Hence, it is very accurate for this type of fantasy. Next is 5. Worlds of Little People. Some authors have written about worlds inhabited by miniature people who have developed a culture of their own in this world or who live in another world. So, as from the type of modern fantasy itself, it is about a story where people are smaller than other creatures or other things. An example of World of Little People, I think, would be Gulliver's Travel or Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels is about a person who survived a very heavy storm while they were sailing in a ship. And then when he wakes up, he finds himself in a shore, tied up there with many little people surrounding him, and then the story progress on. Anyway, the moral of this story is that commitment to something greater than oneself, self-respect, but with the humbleness or respect to others, self-discipline, and acceptance of personal responsibility, respect and caring for others, and caring for other living. So in that story, there was a princess there that would be friends with Gulliver, and she's the princess of what they call Lilliputians. The people there are called Lilliputians, and that kingdom is Lilliput. Anyway, so the princess is put in an arranged marriage with the soldier of the kingdom, from what my memories, from what I can really recall from my memory. And then so she has difficulty knowing what to do, because she's in love with a peasant, someone that doesn't have rank, but she's bound to be married to someone that has rank. And this is where Gulliver steps in. Gulliver helps the peasant be more confident, true to himself, and try to do everything the peasant can do to convince the princess to not marry someone else, and such. 6. Supernatural events and mystery fantasy. Many recent fantasies evoke the supernatural. One common form of supernatural literacy found in children's books is the ghost story. Some ghost stories intrigue younger children, especially when the topic is treated humorously and reassuringly. So, I think one of the examples of this type of modern fantasy is Insidious, because in Insidious there are ghosts, like there is a photo there where there is a ghost, but when that photo was taken, there was nothing there. But when they look at the picture years and years after, there is someone else in the background. And then they called a team of people where they fight evil spirits, or they talk and they exorcise people that are possessed, or people that are being followed by possibly an evil ghost. And then they hypnotize that person, and then go with them in the other world, in the spirit world, and then they solve the mystery of they find out who it is, or what it wants, and how to defeat it, and such. And this Insidious is an accurate example of supernatural events and mystery and fantasy, because this is something way beyond us, way beyond of what we can see. This tackles about ghosts and exorcists, people that exorcist ghosts. 7. Historical fantasy. Historical fantasy, sometimes called time warp fantasy, is a story in which a present-day protagonist goes back in time to a different era. A contrast between the two time periods is shown to readers through the modern-day protagonist's discoveries of and astonishment with earlier customs. An example of this era is the recent popular K-drama called Mr. Queen. This is about a modern-day popular chef that somehow goes back in time and get trapped in a queen's body in Joseon era, where he was very panicked because of course it is something that doesn't happen every day to anyone, and also he doesn't know what to do. But when he accepted that he would be there for a while, he had time to process the things happening around him, and how he is married to the king, and how they're going to have a child, and how he is going to help the king overcome countless of obstacles throughout his time there. And then he suddenly goes back in time and misses being a queen, a woman, a queen, someone who's married and pregnant and almost near having the child and such. I think this is an accurate example of historical or history fantasy, because it is a fantasy, and because a person from the modern day, from the present, goes back in time, goes back into a time in the past, which is the definition of which is the definition of historical fantasy. Quest stories. Quest stories are adventure stories with a search motive. The quest may be pursued for a lofty purpose, such as justice or love, or for a rich reward, such as a magical power or a hidden treasure. Quest stories that are serious in tone are called high fantasy. I think what would be the appropriate example of this is the story that we love, that are from Disney, and we grew up with this story, which is Aladdin. Aladdin is about Aladdin, who is a lovable street urchin who meets Princess Jasmine, the beautiful daughter of the Sultan of Agrabah. While visiting her exotic palace, Aladdin stumbles upon a magic oil lamp that unleashes a powerful, wisecracking, larger-than-life genie. As Aladdin and the genie start to become friends, they must soon embark on a dangerous mission to stop the evil sorcerer Jafar from overthrowing young Jasmine's kingdom. So, that is the summary, but there are parts in the story where at the start, Aladdin was approached by the evil sorcerer Jafar, that was dressed like just an ordinary mysterious man, wherein he gave him the task to get the magic lamp from a cave, and with the warning that to not take anything else but the lamp, and then he would give him whatever he wants. And he did managed to do that, and he discovered the genie and asked to be rich, to become a prince or pretend to be a prince so that he can woo Princess Jasmine to be his wife, and such. So anyway, the moral of the story was that it is about Princess Jasmine and Aladdin, where they teach us to be who we are. Do not try to be someone else or to conform to what others perceive us to be. Be who you are meant to be. Be true to who you are, and live your life with honesty. It also says that Aladdin, the story Aladdin, is also about the overall, about the infinite strength and wealth which comes from within, from ourselves, from inside us. And it is best to be yourself, because poor or rich, you are a diamond in the rough. Last but not the least, number 9. Science fiction and science fantasy. Science fiction is a form of imaginative literature that provides a picture of something that could happen based on real scientific facts and principles. Therefore, story elements in science fiction must have the appearance of scientific plausibility or technical possibility. Hypotheses about the future of humankind and the universe presented in science fiction appear plausible and possible to the reader, because settings and events are built on extensions of known technologies and scientific concepts. So, I have here an example of historical fantasy of science fiction, which would be Fahrenheit 451 or Fahrenheit 451. It is about a warning wherein it revolves around the issue of book burning, but there is a deeper meaning to the book. Bradbury is warning that the monopolizing effect of social media will transform generations to come into society with no genuine connections, no distinctive thoughts, and excessive reliance on technology. Its moral of the story is that Bradbury believes that the human society can easily become oppressive and regimented unless it changes its present tendency toward censorship, suggestion of an individual's innate rights. So basically, Fahrenheit 451 is about a warning that there is a big possibility that in the near future, people would be very reliant to technology, like how we are slowly becoming reliant to technology. Like before, clothes are being washed in a river or somewhere with water and with a bar of soap, and with our hands washing them and squeezing them and such. Before we use handwritten mails, and it gets delivered through a person who travels all through all the way to where it should be emailed. While now we are dependent to society, we just type something and then it would arrive in seconds to someone else gadget. like computer or cell phone.
Modern fantasy has appeal for person with non-literal minds who got beyond the letter of a story to its spirit. Children with their lively imaginations are especially open to reading fantasies. So many types of this topic within this genre: animal fantasies, world of little people, historical fantasy, and so on. It offered to children inspiring and delightful entertainment because the level of conceptual difficulty varies considerably in this genre. So modern fantasy offers many excellent stories for children from the youngest to the oldest. And here's our references. So that's all for our reports. Hope you enjoy and learn a lot. So thank you for listening.